Okay, so I would like to introduce our guest star for today. Francois Levy is a landscape architect in Austin, and that's about all I know about you, Francois, because I'm just meeting you for the first time today. So if you'd like to tell the group a little bit about yourself, and then I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. Boy, I wish I was a landscape architect in Austin.
Oh, you're an architect. Sorry.
Sadly, I'm just an architect.
Yes,
so,
an architect. Sorry. Yes.
and and I guess that's salient because a lot of the features that I'm going to be showing today have a more architectural than landscape bent. So I hope it will nevertheless be fruitful for everyone, and you'll forgive me if we veer off into too much structures. What I like to do for presentations like this is share an actual project, or at least a version of an actual project. This is one that we're rushing to get off the boards and into the field, so to speak. So I'd like to keep it informal. If along the way you see something in the file that you're curious about, by all means, raise your hand, chime in, pop a message in the chat, whatever works for you. Though, frankly, I might miss the message in the chat for a while. So, cough meaningfully if you've got a chat message that I'm ignoring.
I can keep an eye on the chat too, if you don't mind interrupting, if I feel like it's timely.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Appreciate that. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen then. And I'm gonna be working in Vectorworks 2024 here. And as I said, this is a project that we're currently working on. This I've cleaned up this file a little bit to make some minor changes, but essentially it's an outdoor pavilion that we're designing, and there are some landscape and not many hardscape elements. So this was sort of an opportunity to talk about the integration of hardscape and buildings, and the goal of this roughly 1,000 square foot pavilion is to serve as this sort of outdoor gathering space on some secluded land that my clients have, where people, sort of hang out and might have a fire pit and watch the stars and so forth. So it's, really almost just a one-room structure, not conditioned, just an outdoor pavilion, really. So the site that they have is several acres, and in our office we built a site model, and the way we did that is really just by pulling down some USGS maps, because obviously they're not going to survey such a huge property so extensively. Off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure how large this site model is, but their property is several acres. And so we pulled in the USGS maps, dropped them into Vectorworks, scaled them appropriately, traced the 10 or 20 foot contours, and then had Vectorworks generate a site model, as we do pretty much with all of our projects. And in 2D, that site model looks like this. So there was a feature, sort of a hilltop, that's kind of a visual feature for them that they want to focus on here to the northeast, or east northeast, and so we pulled those contours in. So there's just a big gap in the topography between their actual property, which you can see is delimited by the meets and bounds tool, and this distant feature. And there's a roadway here for access. So it's a very large site, but in some ways pretty straightforward. And it was useful for us to model the important views, so that we could check to make sure that our perspectives, that our building was, sited appropriately. And one of the things that I want to draw attention to is the heliodon that's over here on the site model. I'm not. I'm always curious how many people use heliodons. I would assume that in the world of landscape design, that's quite common. But in this case, let me just pop this open and show you the settings. I pulled the latitude and longitude of the site, and input that and created a city in addition to the standard list of US cities that are there. So this is in central Texas off an artificial lake. And there's a specific reason why I wanted to get the shadows just right, but just be aware that if you're working with the heliodon tool, it's fairly easy to look up a location's latitude and longitude and then create your own specific location if you need to be that precise and don't want to settle for just the nearest major city. So the reason the heliodon's particularly important is that the hope of my clients is to have this pavilion at least mostly ready, maybe not entirely complete, but mostly ready in time for the total eclipse that we're going to be experiencing April 8th. So what I did is I set the heliodon to that particular date and time, 1:37 p.m. April 8th, which is the kind of close to the exact time of totality at this location. And then we've got this nice big skylight in the roof that is sort of memorializing that moment. And in fact, the roof pitch is designed to be, if I could just, there, I guess that's where the roof pitch is selected because it is perpendicular to the elevation of the sun at the moment of the eclipse. So that was sort of a fun use of the heliodon tool, is to plug in the exact latitude and longitude, set the date and time of totality, and then just, read off. I can go ahead and select it. We can look at it. And, you can see that the heliodon will show its altitude, which is 66 degrees, and its azimuth, which is, just less than 1 degree off of true south, which is really great because south-facing roofs, as you're well aware, are really an ideal orientation for maximizing shade. So luckily, the eclipse was sort of cooperating with the architecture. And then what that did is it leaves us this large gable end to look out towards that hilltop, which we modeled. And then we put a porch over here on the east side for more outdoor space. So in plan, it's pretty straightforward. There's this sort of northern spine of enclosed spaces for a fireplace and wood storage, a little toilet room, and a kitchenette that gets closed off with some large pocket doors. And of course, for the solid portion of the structure, that's pretty straightforward, just modeled it with Vectorworks walls of varying styles. But for the screen porch itself, those are actually curtain walls. So that's most of our work in our office is residential, so we don't do a lot of commercial storefront. But we find ourselves using the curtain wall tool quite frequently to model screen porches. In this case, a steel frame screen porch, but it works just as well for wood frame screen porches. And then the glazing is just a translucent panel to simulate the insect screening. So curtain wall, not likely a tool that landscape architects are going to be using a lot of. I don't even think that that is available in Landmark. Would be if you're using the designer suite version of Vectorworks. But I pointed out just to sort of demonstrate that there are so many tools in Vectorworks that sometimes you can find some creative ways to use them that might not be as they were initially intended by the software designers, but nevertheless work pretty nicely.
Francois,
Yes.
is that are those? I've never heard of a curtain wall. Are those all glass, or is any part of that screening?
That's all. So a curtain wall is like, you go to like a strip mall and there's these, extruded aluminum mullions and site fixed glass, like any of the millions of square foot of aluminum storefront that you would find all across the US and the world. So that's what the tool is intended to model. But in this case, I just designed the panels, instead of being glass, they're just insect screening. So yeah, there's no glass here. This is all open air.
That's pretty interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So so one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is the hardscape tool, which frankly is probably something that many of you use more than we do. We tend to use, by we I mean interior and building architects, slabs, but hardscapes are somewhat similar in some ways. So in this particular view, just to sort of demonstrate very quickly some of the possible uses of the hardscape tool, I've isolated a few. So probably the more straightforward one is this path over here. Let me back up, and you can see that it is running all over the site, and it's a single hardscape object. So what that looks like is that you can see that it is flush with the terrain. So if we kind of peek here inside the site model, you can see that it's actually kind of going below the surface of the top of the site model. So if we were to cut a section through here, you would see that. And so if we look at what that, examine that, inspect it with the object info palette, you can see that it's a hardscape. I've got a class that I assign it to, and it has a style associated with it. So if we look at the hardscape settings, we can see a bit more about that. So again, the hardscape style is one that I sort of pulled from the standard Vectorworks libraries and then tweaked it to my liking. So I'm calling that gravel path. So I can have multiple instances of that hardscape. And if I change the depth of the gravel or the type of gravel or whatever in one, it'll change on all of them. So that's the benefit of a style, is that you just set it up once and then you can use it as many times as you want. In this case, the two configuration options are a boundary or a pathway. If it were the same width throughout, it would make sense to make this a bound pathway. But because it changes width and it turns into some kind of parking, very informal parking areas, I decided to use that as a boundary. So essentially just trace the entire edges of that whole road and parking area and so forth with a polyline. And then rather than use the hardscape tool Let's see if I can pull that up. It's over here in the site. So there's a couple of ways of generating hardscapes. One of which is that you just use the hardscape tool, which I've clicked over here, and then you can just draw it using standard drawing modes for any path or polyline. And what I prefer to do, just because tend to have lots of editing along the way,
Hey,
is
Ray, how are you today?
just go ahead and put that, draw that as a polyline, make my edits, and then once I'm satisfied with the results, I'll just go to the menu and create objects from shapes, and then define that polygon or polyline as a hardscape. So again, if we look at these settings on this particular one, we can see that it's a boundary. And it's going to be drawn in 2D. And you can see that all of these settings are grayed out, and that's primarily because those are defined by the style. So where you get this little curved arrow, that indicates that this is by style, and that's not editable. And where you get the two little lines with the slider icon, that means that that's a user-defined setting. And you can edit that style to make more of the parameters editable on a case-by-case basis, or you can make it more rigid and not editable. Just depends on what you want to achieve. Here in 3D, we've got several options for hardscapes. One is that it can be completely independent of the site model, so no site modifier. We can make it a planar pad. I'll show you an example of that. Aligned, which means that it is going to pick up adjacent geometry and conform to that. So if you place your hardscape adjacent to a wall whose bottom is sloped, the hardscape will follow the slope of that wall. A path or a texture bed or draped. So texture bed and draped are somewhat similar. Texture bed, you can sort of think of that as you're just painting a texture onto the site. It has no depth. Whereas draped, it would actually have some depth, and it, as the name implies, it sort of lies on the site and conforms to the site topography. So that's what I did for this particular path. Chose it as draped.
Francois?
Yeah.
Can you show us that drop down again?
Sure.
What's the difference between draped then and aligned?
So aligned is going to align itself to other drawn elements. So if you place the hardscape adjacent to, say, a landscaping wall, and you reshape the bottom of that landscaping wall, the hardscape will conform to that, will get its slope to the adjacent wall. So anything that it's touching, or not absolutely anything, but most 3D geometry that the aligned hardscape is touching, it will conform to that geometry. So you control the slope of the hardscape by controlling the adjacent verticals or footings or whatnot. So you can get some pretty heavily warped kind of features. Whereas draped just pays attention to the site model and drapes itself on the site model. Doesn't look at any other geometry.
Thank you.
So I'm going to pop open my resource manager here, and let's look at our symbols. And you can see I've got a folder here for hardscape styles, and here are the 3 styles that I have in this file. So here's the gravel path. I'm going to right click on that and edit that so that we can have a look at it. So this is the style that is defining what the 2D and 3D appearance of that particular hardscape is. You can see that boundary or pathway are options. And I haven't put in any kind of price values here, but I could make those user defined, right? And then you could go on a case-by-case basis and use that for reports to price it. In 2D, um, it's got a pattern, which is this gravel hatch. And I'm going to change this, the main area class. I'll just make it my gravel class. There we go. And then in 3D, if we look at the main area components, you can see that I've designed this to have a 4 inches of gravel on top of 6 inches of compacted soil. So I don't know if that's really should be 4 inches or 3 inches, or if that's adequate subgrade, but just for the purposes of illustrating this, those are some values that I've assigned. And you can see that, for example, this gravel component, you can assign a material to it. So there are all sorts of materials that ship with Vectorworks. And materials are interesting because they can have a variety of information associated with them. We'll look at that in a second. I can give them a texture. I can give them an appearance in plan and an appearance in section. So let me cancel out of that, go back to my resource manager, and let's look at materials. All right, and so it's buried in here. So here's my, for example, gravel compacted material. Let's edit that. So you can see that I can give it a description, a name. I can give it a fill. And I can give it a surface, a texture. And then it can have various classification specifications. Obviously, this is not asphalt, right? That needs to be corrected. And I can give it physical characteristics like yield strength or specific heat, emissivity, albedo, how reflective it is to heat. One that's particularly interesting is embodied carbon. And I can, give it a density. So theoretically, I could, assign materials to everything in my project and then create a worksheet that I could, weigh my project by multiplying the density times its volume. And there you go. And then I can also add some custom fields, which I haven't done here. So the assigning a material to a component of your hardscape just allows you potentially to have a greater level of detail in terms of producing reports, and it also helps you control the visual appearance of the material. So back to that hardscape style. So if I look at the main area components, again, I just have 2 materials, very, very simple, very straightforward. So that's one of them, right? I've got another one, another hardscape. It's really quite simple. I've got this little fire ring here. And so let's look at that in plan. And you can see that I've got an elevation called out here. So what I did for that is that I just drew a circle. That's the appropriate radius. And then under AEC, create objects from shapes, create a hardscape, right? Just like I did for that path. But in this case, let's look at those settings. This one's aligned, but that doesn't really matter because there's nothing adjacent to it to align to, so that's kind of irrelevant. But I've made it a slab, right? And so what's interesting about that is if I have a slab and I right click on it, let me see where I can find those. I think I might need to get it actually from the object info palette. Yeah. All right, so you can see that by making it a, sorry, that went away. Let's pin that down. So over here, I've got in the hardscape settings in the object info palette, if I scroll down far enough, I'll get surface modifiers that allows me to show stake or grade objects. In this case, I just have a stake object. So I can hide that or I can show it. So let's click on Edit Surface Modifiers and see how that works. So I'm in my view over here. I've set my settings so that I can show other objects while in edit mode. That helps give me some point of reference. And if you click over here, you can see that I've inserted a stake. So I'll just delete that stake and edit that, exit that, and let's look at that in 3D. And I'll go ahead and put my clip cube on here. So, and then I will update the site model. So you can see that this sort of disk of flagstone and base is just, it's dead flat. If I hide it, you can see that there's an indentation in the site model for it. And that's because I've got this configuration setting to cut the site model. But if I go back down to Edit Surface Modifiers, there it is, right? There's the circle of the paving. And you can see that when you do that, you get this little, all your other palettes are grayed out, but you get this little surface modifier palette that's floating here. And so I can pan, zoom, select. Those are pretty much my only sort of getting around tools. And then I can either insert a stake or a grade. And in this case, a stake is what I want. And I'll just set a Z of negative 19 inches like I did before. Because before coming today, I figured out that that was the elevation that I wanted. So I'll go ahead and exit the surface there and update the site model. And now if I go back to a 3D view here, you can see that there's a little bit of a bold depression. Not much. Let's go ahead and go to our surface modifiers and change that to, say, 24 inches. And update my site model. And you can see that's more pronounced, right? Where it's creating this sort of shallow cone for my fire pit. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a cone, obviously. It doesn't have to be a circle. It can be a slab, and you can put stakes at the edge of the slab in order to define the slope. Or if instead of stakes, you can insert, let me click on the site and edit surface modifiers, right? You can insert a grade where you have an actual grade object. It's like a line that defines the direction of slope rather than a point or a series of points for stakes. But in this case, a stake was most useful. And then I have a third hardscape that I put here. And I think I lost a class along the way. So let's turn all those on. No, that didn't do it. Huh, interesting. All right, well, I'll figure out why that's not showing properly in a moment. That's how a presentation goes. Oh, I see what's happening. All right. So here's a hardscape for this little outdoor area. And in this case, um, it's a planar pad. I didn't select cut the site model. So the site model is reshaping itself to go to the top of the hardscape, which is obviously not what I want. So I'll update the site model and that should fix it. There we go. And so now if I hide this, I'll just delete it. You can see there's an indentation for that too. So let's have a look at this hardscape. This is just a planar pad. It's got, 2D, 3D components. I've made it a slab drainage because I might want to go back and modify it later with some slope. Right now, it's just dead flat. Probably not a great idea. And again, if I go to my resource manager and look at that one, right? So this is my limestone on sand with a steel edge. And so my main area components, I've got 3 components here. I've gone ahead and assigned a distinct class to each of these components for greater graphic control. If you're very disciplined about how you use materials, that's probably not necessary because the materials will do the work that a class would do in terms of showing appropriate graphics in section and in elevation, or plan rather, as well as texture. But I've gone ahead and created some classes for myself, given some relative depths. And you can see that the top of the flagstone is my datum. So that's everything is going to be relative to the top of the hardscape. And then I also have a border component here, which is the full depth. And I assigned that to I kind of gave it a core 10 kind of texture and assigned a weathered steel material to it, which is the ASTM A588 material. If I ever decide to get very detailed in my reporting. And so for my hardscape settings, you can see that as part of the definition of this style, it's grayed out right now. The width of that border is 1/2 inch, probably 3/8 would do, but I don't want to get too granular here. So it's going to have this steel edging all the way around, and then the stone is inset. So oftentimes you'll see hardscape borders that might be quite wide, like an 8-inch or a 16-inch row lock course along the edge of a path, for example, or 12 inches of stone or whatever. But I wanted to use this to demonstrate that the edging of your hardscape can be quite narrow. Doesn't have to conform to sort of traditional parameters of what you would think of as a hardscape border. So those are the 3 hardscapes that I have in this project. If you're curious, I've also got a slab here. So that's distinct from a hardscape object in a couple of ways. If you look at the components of the slab, that should look very familiar if you've looked at hardscapes or walls, right? There's layers of components. Each one can be assigned a material. In this case, I didn't. Each one can have a class. They have thickness and so on and so forth. So very much like a hardscape definition. The couple of distinctions, a minor one is an organizational one. hardscape styles are saved essentially as symbols. And so you will find them from the symbol plugin objects of your resource manager, whereas slabs get their own little category of resources in the resource manager, as do roofs, which are constructed, or the anatomy of a roof is very similar to a hardscape or to a slab in that it has multiple components, right? So, so that's kind of a sort of a housekeeping kind of thing, that if you're looking for hardscapes as a category of resource here, you won't find it. You'll have to look in your symbols, and that's where the hardscape styles reside. But again, the most important distinction between hardscapes and slabs is that slabs they don't react to sites. Site models don't pay attention to slabs, and slabs don't pay attention to site models, whereas hardscapes are sort of out of the box, sort of natural site modifiers. You don't, if you have a hardscape, the site modifier is built into the hardscape. You don't need a site modifier to, create a hole for your hardscape and then add the hardscape. The hardscape sort of digs its own hole, so to speak. So that might be interesting to sort of look at some of those differences. So any questions anyone wants to chime in about hardscapes or comments, or perhaps a correction of something that I got wrong? That'd be great too. Any questions?
Francois, if you set the hardscape above the site model, will it automatically create fill?
Yes. Yeah, you can do some things that are, somewhat implausible with hardscapes. Yeah, I mean, we can experiment right here. I'll just take this one and I'll move it up 3 feet. It didn't move. Interesting. Might be the hardscape style that I chose. Let's look at that. Yeah, so let's do a slab. Maybe that's the trick. Yeah, there we go. So slab drainage, no. Slab, yes. And then if I have that, you can do wacky things like that.
So if you're going to create a berm around that at that height, you would use a grade limiter?
Yeah, you'd want to use site modifiers for berms, just because you can give them sort of more organic shapes, and they're just pulling the site up or down. You could also do some direct modeling of the site, which is can be a little tricky. I prefer to sort of draft berms and swales as polylines in 2D, excuse me, and then convert them to site modifiers from the AEC menu, create objects from shapes. I think that's
with stakes,
probably the
right?
better way to go. I'm sorry?
You also do it just by placing some stakes?
Yeah, absolutely. You can drop stakes and have those stakes be part of the site data. Yeah, stakes work too. Personally, I tend to think in terms of topo lines rather than points in most cases. So I find just drawing the topos to be a little more intuitive, but I'm probably just stuck in my ways.
That's the wonderful thing about Vectorworks. So many ways to do one thing.
So yeah, I always say that the good news about Vectorworks is there's 12 different ways to do something. And the bad news about Vectorworks is there's 12 different ways to do something.
Exactly.
Francois,
yeah.
may I ask a question about your path? Now,
yeah.
Did you say that was done as draped?
Yes.
So if you wanted to say, pop that up 3 inches
Yes.
above, how would you do that?
Yeah, so what I would probably do in that case, let's go to the gravel path and edit that. And look at the main area components. Do you see how I've got the gravel, the datum is the top of the gravel?
Yes.
So what I might do is make the datum the bottom of the gravel.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
That would be one way to do it. And
Easy
now,
way.
yeah, now that assumes that the gravel thickness is the same thickness as, you know, what I want it to be offset, right? Like you wanted 3 inches and my gravel's 4 inches.
Mhm.
I can also try just moving it. I think that works. Just doing a move 3D. Yeah, that works too.
Okay. Okay. Good. Easy. Thank you.
Yeah, and let's see what happens when we update the site model. It probably breaks everything. Nope.
Oh, yay.
Nope. Yeah, you can if I zoom in real close, you can see there's my road base sticking up above the road.
Okay. Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I kind of like that up an inch or so. Give it a little shadow line. Okay. Let's see. So, and you know, if a question occurs to you, then we can certainly go back and look at that. The other thing that we were interested in talking about today is the new 2024 cabinet tool. So here's the interior of the pavilion, obviously. And then I've got this little galley kitchen hidden by some, or potentially closed behind some pretty large pocket doors. And so that's just a group, and we can look at the components there. So the refrigerators are just standard stainless steel refrigerators that I just pulled out of the Vectorworks library. This is a 24-inch undercounter Sub-Zero, right? The only difference is that I tinkered with the stainless steel texture. It has the I think the native texture that it comes with has more of a kind of a brushed sort of look, and I wanted everything to be consistent. Then in this little galley, the countertop, because I've got a custom hole cut in it for this stainless steel sink, the countertop is actually a floor object. I also have this induction cooktop that I dropped in. So I've cut a hole for the induction cooktop and cut a hole for the sink. And so the easiest thing I found to deal with that is the floor object, which is sort of an old legacy Vectorworks component that I still think has lots of good use. And floors are distinct from slabs in that they don't have components, right? The floor, it's just a single thing. It doesn't have multiple components. You can cut holes in it just like you would clip a polyline or any other surface. So you just overlay a rectangle or a rounded rectangle or whatever, and select the overlay and the floor and clip surface, and it makes a hole, which is nice. So yeah, so use floors a lot for countertops, and then the cabinet itself. This is the new 2024 cabinet. So let's have a look at those settings. This is a very simple one. Kind
Francois,
of base, yeah.
back to countertops. I've used auto hybrids. Is it better to use floors?
Yeah,
I've used extrudes, but then they don't show in
Great. Yeah, great
color in
question.
2D.
That is exactly why I use floors, because floors are hybrids. Let me just pull that countertop away here so you can see it. So there's the floor, right? And if I hit down the B key, hit the B key so you can see the cabinetry objects below, you can see that all of that is being masked. So that's why I don't use extrudes for countertops, is that they don't mask what's beneath them, as you just pointed out. An auto hybrid would work just fine, but that's just an extra step. First, I got to create the extrusion, and then I have to turn it into an auto hybrid, whereas a floor is inherently a hybrid. So I just skip the step of it's almost like an auto hybrid.
Love it. Love it being
That makes
simpler.
sense?
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. It's right. Simple is good.
Yes.
There are so many steps. If I can eliminate one, that's great. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, so let's see. There we go. So I'm going to just go back to my save view. It's probably easier. Yeah, so this cabinet is the new 2024 cabinet tool. Got another question. Okay, great. So if we look at those cabinet settings, I base these cabinets on just sort of standard outdoor stainless steel cabinets for these kinds of applications, because it is outdoors, even though it'll be closed up behind that big double pocket door most of the time. I certainly don't want the humidity to get to it and do all sorts of things. So this is just a very straightforward stainless steel cabinet. You can see that you've got a top plan view and a front view here. All of your settings are different setting panes are on the left. So you can specify whether the cabinet is a wall cabinet, a tall cabinet, or a base cabinet. It's all the same tool with just different configuration options. Specify the width and the height and the depth. In this case, I anticipate using a 3 cm countertop material, so that's real easy to deal with. You just type 36 because inches are the native Vectorworks unit, and then subtract 3 cm, and it knows that that's centimeters, and then it will go ahead and calculate the correct height for you. For configuration, I have can make this double-sided, or a blind left or right, or a hinged corner, or a diagonal end panel, whatever, all sorts of options. And this will be a frameless overlay, but I could have a framed inset, beaded inset, any number of options for how the cabinetry is actually put together. And I'm going to make the face custom. And so you get this little window here. And so I can just, if I wanted to add a drawer at the top, for example, I would just add new, and you see it creates an opening. And so kind of like rearranging the stacking order of your design layers or your sheet layers, I can just get this little icon and just drag the one that I created from the second position up to the first position, and that just moves it up here to the top. And you can see that it automatically, this little grid here is meant to represent a calculator, or the calculator app on your phone, if you prefer. And so what that means is that it's just going to automatically calculate the height of each component after it takes the overall height, subtracts the kick, and so they're going to be equal. So if I don't want to do that, I can just click on this icon, and now I get this little pencil, and I will make that, say, 6 inches tall. So now it's made that 6 inches tall, and then it's made the door below it calculated after it takes the overall cabinet height and subtracts the 6 inches for the door and the 4 inches for the kick, and so forth. So instead of an opening, let's go ahead and make that a drawer. And it's subtracted an 1/8 because I've defined the spacing over on this side as a mid reveal of 1/8 of an inch. So when it was a 6-inch opening and I made it a drawer, it subtracted 1/8 of an inch. So let me go back to 6 inches there. And so rather improbably, it has added a handle on that, which I'm not going to have. So let's go ahead and fix that. So if I go to hardware, for the drawer handle, there's a whole library of drawer handles to choose from. And let's look at the defaults over here. Lots and lots of defaults. If you've played with the cabinet tool previously, then you should be very familiar. But you even get all these IKEA pulls. So if you want a literal IKEA or something that's maybe a little more European, you can pick one of those. So I've got this 7-inch Ornis. It's kind of a nice default that I like, right? But in this case, I'll just have none for the drawer. So it gets rid of that, and so now that's just a blind that covers this thing. That's not actually how these stainless steel manufacturers tend to make those. They just have the door cover the exposed sink front. But just so you know that that's the option. And then let's look at the textures. So this is pretty cool. If we go over to finish options, I can define different finish types for the exterior, left, right, the back, the interior, and so forth, right? And then if I go to my class attributes, I can give a distinct class or a material to the cabinet box itself, the frames, the doors and drawers, the glazing, and so forth. So I can create a cabinet that's, say, painted on the exterior, but maple on the interior, whatever. All that can be done. And so here you can see that I've just assigned everything. I've given it the material, metal stainless material, if I want to do some takeoffs later, texture it by class. And so I've just given it this material, this stainless steel material, to all of the different components, and then it renders appropriately. I can have my cabinet doors and drawers open in 3D or not. So, leave it ajar and does that. I can show door markers. So now it'll show this door marker that points towards the hinge, right? And if I don't want to see that in my model, but I do want to see it in my construction documents, rather than have it assigned to the cabinet class, I've got, in my case, I have a notes architectural class that I tend to turn on in my construction documents, but turn off in my model view. So I'll just get my navigation palette off. So now I don't have to see it. And so that's how I built these 3 cabinets. Again, this one has a drawer, unlike the other 2. And when it comes to the hardware, I can control how far from the vertical the hardware is. So I had this before as an inch, and that top handle just felt a little bit too close. Potential little knuckle scraper there. So I've got the level of control with this new tool that I can scooch it down an inch, and works just fine.
Francois, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
First of all, where did you even get the cabinet tool from? And then secondly, how did you create the toe kick? I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I didn't see that setting anywhere.
So the cabinet tool, if I don't think that the cabinet tool ships with Landmark. I'm not 100% sure about that. It definitely ships with the Designer series, which has, you know, all the tools. And I find that even as an architect, I mean, all of my buildings sit on the ground. So as an architect, I do a fair amount of site work. I mean, not to the level of sophistication of a landscape designer by any means, but you know, so I end up using some of the landscape tools. So I don't know how many of you are also using the designer version of Vectorworks or just Landmark. So if you have it, it's going to be in the fixtures and furnitures palette. Let me go ahead and switch to the.
I think we have it in the little house icon. That's where I see the cabinets.
Okay, let's look at that. And of course, I've got a custom workspace. So let me switch my workspace to Landmark. That's possibly what many of you are using.
Francois, I had a question from before. Where is the floor tool?
Oh, it's not a tool. It's a command under let's see. Yep. So if you ever know that there's a command, but you can't remember where it is on the Mac anyway, you can just go to the help menu and just start typing the name of what you think the command might be. So this is an unfamiliar workspace. So in Landmark, it's under Landmark, Architectural, and Floor. And so you would just draw, say, a rectangle, highlight it, and then pull down that command, and it would turn it into a floor. You can specify the thickness and how far above the ground it is.
Thanks.
So let's see. Back to you said you've got the little house. And yep, there's
Can you
the
profile
cabinet
the edges of the floor tool or the floor that you create?
Let me get back to that in just one second. So
Okay.
yeah, here's the cabinet tool. It's under your in Landmark under your building shell tools right there. And then the other outstanding question is, how did I make the kick? So that's just a cabinet setting under general, cabinet box. There you go, toe kick. And I can specify, I made it 3.5 inches tall and 4 inches deep. And I can apply it to the front or to the side. So like if you have a corner cabinet, you want the kick to go around the corner, you can do that. I mean, we could spend 2 hours just talking about the cabinet tool. There's so many features here. Okay, so back to the floor. Can you repeat your question about the outline?
Yes, can you profile the edge? If you're doing a detail or a section through a countertop, can you
Gotcha.
spec
Like
the
a
edge profile?
bullnose. You want to do a bullnose or an eased edge or something like that.
Sure.
So yes and no. Let me just group this so that we can isolate it and not look at other things. So one of the things that I think many users don't know about, that's weird. Oh, of course, I'm not in my usual workspace. No wonder my keyboard shortcuts aren't working. All right. So one of the things that many users don't know is that even an object that is not an extrusion can behave like an extrusion. So for example, there's a framing tool. You can subtract solids from the framing tool. So if I needed to get a bullnose on this floor, I would just go to the 3D menu and get the little fillet edge here and specify, say, I don't know, 1/2 inch radius, and then just click on that leading edge. Obviously this is, you know, inset, so it would only have a profile on the leading edge, and then hit the checkbox, and then there's my leading edge, right? So that's easy to do. The problem is that once I do that, it's not that it stops being a floor, but it behaves like a fillet. Now, if I double click on this and edit the solid, it won't let me go back and edit it. Oh, that's weird. All right. Not sure why. So let me just undo. Normally, I should be able to edit the solid and it would get me back to a floor. So the short answer is, if you're going to profile it, and you want that level of detail in your model, then you're better off doing what was brought up before, which is to do an extrusion, fillet it, and then make it an auto hybrid. That would be the way to go. Okay, got some more chat questions. Yep. Okay, cool. I think we're all caught up. And then in the kind of department of little kludges, I've got out here this sort of outdoor cooking area. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm going to have to go back to my workspace. I'm at C without it. Okay. So over here at this outdoor kitchen, I've got a, something really basic. It's just a stucco wall that's stucco on two sides, up to 3 feet. So if we look at that style, you can see I've got wood framing. It shouldn't be insulated. That's the wrong class. Sheathing, stucco, and so forth. That's great. So it's got stucco on both sides. And then we haven't detailed it yet, but I imagine that there's going to be some sort of little cap, possibly a galvanized break form metal cap. So the way I modeled that is I just have a wall style for these little caps. It's designed to be, whatever thickness I want. It has no components. It's 2 inches tall under the insertion options. And so I just trace another wall on top of this one, and there's my cap. So sometimes you can use walls for things that are not, literally walls. And then this is, I think this is just something you can, buy somewhere. It's a table, a heavy duty table with a hole cut in it for a smoking egg. And so the egg I imported from the SketchUp 3D warehouse, and then of course had to completely rebuild because a lot of those models are really in bad shape. But then to make this sort of stand for it, that's just a group. And if I double click on it, you can see that part of it is the table and chairs tool. So I've set the chairs to 0, but I could turn them on, and there would be some end chairs here. I think it's too small. So that's a table, and I'll just drag it away. And here's another table where I've made the legs, essentially 0. Or teeny tiny 0.2 inches. So I've just superimposed 2 tables to get this heavy duty shelf. This is something a client had, and I just went and measured it and sort of reproduced a kind of a facsimile of it. So don't be afraid to sort of mess with these standard tools. It's obviously a lot faster to type in all these parameters than to sit there and laboriously extrude legs and styles and tops and so forth. So I really love just sort of kind of grabbing off the shelf Vectorworks tools and repurposing them, like this little smoker stand or the wall cap. And there's lots of other things going on in this little model, and I just wanted to leave us a little bit of time if anyone had any questions about anything you see. or I can revisit something that we've already discussed if it wasn't clear or if I was incomplete.
Francois, how did you wrap the stucco at the end of those walls?
Let's look at that. Good question. So I'll need to turn on my classes here. Oh, interesting. That's very odd. Let's do this. There we go. Let's turn on all our components. So you can see I've turned on all my components, and let me just turn this cap off. So you can see that I've got my frame component, I've got sheathing, and then I've got the stucco. So in the building shell tool, or palette rather, there's a wall, and it might be in a slightly different place in your workspace, but there is a wall end cap tool. So let me just remove wall breaks and get that off of there. So that's what a wall would typically look like. But with the wall end cap tool, I can just drag, you see how it's highlighting each individual component as I hover over it? So I'll just drag the plywood to the plywood, not that they would really do that, and then drag the stucco to the stucco. And so now it just caps that. Or I could just drag the stucco to the stucco and ignore the plywood. So that's how I did that. Now you can't really see it until you have your component on, but you can see it's just this little component sticking there on the end of the wall.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Could you do that again? You go into the wall end cap and then go into the plan view and drag. So you did like a wall, you went into the wall join.
No, nope. It's let me undo that. There we go. So it's let me go back to the landscape. Excuse me, the landmark space, so that I can give you some good directions. Okay, so in my building shell tool, I've got this. I've got wall join. That's railing join. Here's my wall join. And a component join. Here's the wall end cap right there. So it's a separate tool. I already had one on, so I just removed it so I could demonstrate it. And so when you have that on, you can just hover over a component, click, and drag to its analog on the other side of the wall, or wherever you want. Like, I don't have to do that. I can join the stucco to the, well, yeah, it's not going to let me do that. So I'm just dragging the stucco over to the stucco with this tool, and then it just adds a cap.
Thank you.
Richard was asking if the ribs are modeled or if it's a texture. I'm sorry to disappoint. It's just a texture. Oh, right. Yep. Now the ridge cap we do model. It just makes roofs look far more believable when they've got a little ridge cap. Other questions?
Francois, I do have a question. It's a very general question, not specific to this topic, but everybody else might want to hear it. Is I have many past versions of Vectorworks in my applications folder, and I think I probably should just delete them all But is there a reason why I shouldn't delete them or why I should keep them? Have any ideas?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I delete mine. I keep like one, maybe two old versions, and then I ditch the rest of them because I find I never use them. So there's a couple of things to think about. Vectorworks can save back 6 versions. So if you're here's a Vectorworks file, if I file export, and you can see I'm in 2024, I can export back down to 2019 and no older than that. So every time there's a new version of Vectorworks, they knock off the last one. So that's just something to be aware of. Vectorworks can import it won't be under import, it'll just be an open command. Vectorworks can open old versions of files that are up to 12 revisions old, if I'm not mistaken. So if your files, if after you've practiced for a while and you've got 20-year-old files, Vectorworks may not be able, your latest Vectorworks may not be able to open your really old files. Just because they're too old. So having an old version of Vectorworks laying around so that you can access, projects from the long ago might be a good idea. However, in practice, that almost never happens, to me anyway, just because Vectorworks is so different now than it was 20 years ago that there's probably not a lot in an old file that I would want to salvage, unless, of course, somebody hires me to do an addition to one of my own projects, which has happened. So as a last resort, if you have an old file that you really need to open and your current version of Vectorworks won't open it, then you can always send it to Vectorworks. And my understanding is they will update it for you. I don't know if it's a courtesy or, probably if you needed a bunch of files updated, they might charge you something for that. But my understanding is they will do that. And,
is there a way maybe to take the old file and open it as a PDF and then import a PDF back in the new thing?
No, but one thing you could do, and not everybody is necessarily want to do this, is there is a batch convert command in Vectorworks.
Oh yeah, right. I forgot about that.
So there's batch convert. So you could point your batch convert command and point it to a folder or your entire hard drive. And it would find every old Vectorworks file that it could open. It would open it and immediately save it back as a current version so that you don't have to do this manually. So that's one way, one thing you might do, and I've often toyed with this, but I've never done it myself. So, this is kind of theoretical, is with every version of Vectorworks, just batch convert your entire hard drive so that all of your Vectorworks files are always up to date. Now, a 20-year-old file, when it gets converted up to, the latest version, may not turn out quite as expected. It might be a little funky in some ways, but I've been really surprised. Like I've got a meeting on Saturday with somebody who's buying a building that I did work on 12 years ago. And, I pulled open the file and it was kind of stunning how nicely it upgraded. And when I was working on my books, there were times when I wanted to refer to really old projects of mine and, kind of turn them into graphics for the book. And, never had a problem with old files. And then the other thing to think about, Eric, is that if you've got, I'm sorry, Bill, if you've got a really old version of Vectorworks, it might not run on your relatively new machine.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So, you know, you may be hanging on to a copy of Vectorworks, 2008 that you have been forward migrating to your new PC every 3 years, but that thing probably doesn't run.
Didn't work, right? Well, the batch convert tool, I actually remember you talking about that once, and I completely forgot about it. But that sounds like the way to go. Now, when you do that, does it totally rewrite the file, or does it keep a version of the old file alone?
You have an option that it will either convert in place. In other words, it will overwrite the old file with the new file, or you can batch convert can create duplicates. I got a lot of old Vectorworks files, man, and I have a big hard drive, but it ain't that big. So having duplicate files may be a problem.
Well, it's probably smaller than having duplicate applications.
Not necessarily.
Oh, really? Okay, well, you've got
Anyway,
big
but yeah, I would experiment with like one project, do a duplicate on one project, see how it turns out before taking the plunge and doing your whole hard drive.
Right. Well, thank you for that. It's great. Good.
Yeah.
There's another question there. Do you always create the site model in the same file as the architectural model? The site seems to be really big, or do you ever reference the site in to reduce the file size?
Yeah. The answer is it depends. It's actually not. So the size of the site model is not really the issue in terms of, let's say, acreage. What really matters is how many vertices there are in the site. That's what's going to determine, like you may have noticed that when I was updating the site for these little hardscapes, like the fire pit and the path, it updated instantly in spite of being, the 15 acres or 10 acres or whatever. So it's not really the extent of the site. This is really big, right? Let's go and look at the source data. So here are the contours that generated this site. These are probably USGS 20-foot contours. So this one has an elevation of 2000. Yeah, so these are 20-foot contours. So if I select all, you can see I only have 9 3D polygons. And if I select this hairy looking one, it only has 136 vertices. Right, so these are really kind of very faceted contours. And so that's what's going to determine whether the site is a real bear to manipulate, is how many vertices, because of course you're creating a triangulated irregular network. And so let me go to my, where is it? Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my workspace. So there's a triangle between every 3 points. So that's really what's going to determine whether that file is huge or not. So yeah, if I look at this in top view, you can see there's really not that many triangles to this. I mean, it's a big site, but it's not a big site. And then the nice thing is that if you look at the site settings, the site model settings under 3D display, I have the mesh smoothing turned on. So let's turn that off and see what it looks like. So with the mesh smoothing turned off, you can see that site model is really kind of faceted, right? But with mesh smoothing turned on, that gets a lot smoother. Now, mesh smoothing is just a rendering trick. Like it doesn't actually make the site smoother. It just makes it look smoother. And you can see once you get past a certain point, when these little escarpment walls are so vertical that you know, it's it doesn't smooth those quite as well. So if the file has lots and lots of vertices, I may reference it in, but it's really less a question of file size, and it's more a question of workflow. Like if multiple people are working on a project at once, it might make sense for the site model to be broken out as a separate file so that you can work group reference it in and work that way. Or you could turn it into a you know, a shared file with shared layers. That works as well too. But I'm regularly throwing around 300 meg files, and you know, those don't seem to be too much of a problem.
Also depends on how good of a computer you have, huh?
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound callous, but it's like as much as painful as it is to like spend money on computers, it you know, if you're waiting for the thing to render for 10 minutes 5 times a day, it's going to pay for itself pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
Sad to say, kind of buy them regularly, unfortunately.
Time is money. So
Yep.
you spend it one way or another.
That's right.
We just
Yeah, and there was a comment in the chat about RCAT for site model. I'm sorry, for product models. Thanks for bringing that up.
What is RCAT?
It's a website research. I mean, it used to be like a catalog, it's an architectural catalog, but now it's online, of course.
And is there material free, or you have to pay for it?
Michael, I'm not sure. I don't use it myself. Michael, what's your experience with that? It's free.
Free. Cool.
I have a question on roofs.
Yeah.
Or roofs. I find maybe I don't know how to use them properly, but I find it really hard to do anything that has any sort of like more, you know, if you have any kind of complexity, you have to, the way I do it is I just make like mini houses inside and each give them their own roof, but it feels like there must be a better way to do it than that.
Say more.
So if let's say there's, you know, a roof going one way, I mean, even my own roof has a lot of different facets, and you just can't do that with the roof tool. You really have, you know, what your house here has a simple roof, but what if it had another like A-frame gable roof going the other way?
Yeah, let me show you some quick tricks here. So I'm just going to create a rectangle. You know, I'll make it 30 feet by 20 feet. And
It might be a good idea to have a meeting on building roofs.
yeah. That's another topic we could talk about. But just real quick. So let's say I want this to be gabled on the short ends, but I also want like a gabled dormer almost on the wide ends, right? So what I might do is take that rectangle and duplicate it and rotate it left, and then reshape this second rectangle so that it was the same width. Yeah. But then what I'll do is I'll add maybe 2 inches to the height and then add these together. So now, if you look closely, you'll see that there's this little 1-inch sort of bay. And now, create a roof. Okay. Gable. 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 Like that.
So what's the trick to make it slightly higher and slightly bigger?
The trick was to give it a little, so that that is not a continuous wall, that it's interrupted, right? The other thing that you could do is you could insert a window in that roof and create a dormer, a gabled dormer, if you wanted this configuration. But yeah, boy, roofs, we could talk about roofs all day long. And you're right, they're not perfect. What I tend to find is that using the roof object, where all the roof faces are a single object, usually works for me, 95% of the time. But sometimes I'll get to a roof design that I want to do, and it doesn't quite get me over the goal line. And so then what I will do is I will ungroup that into a series of roof faces. And so now these are, individual roof faces that I can then manipulate with a little bit more control.
As landscape designers, what we're often just trying to imitate the existing roof, not trying to build a new roof, because we're doing rainwater capture.
Right.
So to try and imitate the roof that we're seeing in a photograph is very challenging.
Yeah. That's where a little Google Earth comes in handy, where you can, hopefully get a clean aerial of what that roof shape. I mean, I'm in the same boat, right? I've got this one house that we did an addition to, and it had been added to 3 times, and we weren't actually doing anything with the roof line, but we had to show it accurately for permitting purposes. And I think we went and tried to measure that house like 3 or 4 times, and looked at photographs, and we're just scratching our heads, because it was one of those roofs that had been added onto so weirdly so many times that it just, here, how about a shed here? And 1 gable's good, 3 is better. And none of them had the same pitch. So anyway, I get you.
So unless anybody has any pressing questions, it's probably a good time to wrap up. Francois, I'd like to thank you very much for being our guest star today. You were fabulous. I really enjoyed this, and I'm sure everybody did too. And I'm happy to see your people here too. So we had some new faces. So thanks for all your participation. And I'll be sending out the recording to my people. Hold December 14, pencil it in on your calendar, and we'll try and get something scheduled for that day. Thank you, and buenos dias. Goodbye.